attended the last presentation of the session that will be by Diaz. Diaz is also affiliated or administrated with the DEXs at Munich, so he's completed his master in informatics, and now he's with the Pure Analytics that is doing very cool stuff when it comes to collection and making actually the available to users. And before Diaz joined the free space in some way, he was also at McKinsey where he was doing data collection for Diaz. That is the easiest.
Okay. Yes, so I'll talk about sequencing rules in EVM blockchains and why talk a little bit about sequencing rules and how they affect trading on decentralized exchanges. I've been working as a software engineer at TUM for the last 3 years, and recently I finished my master's thesis at TUM on this topic, and this talk is based on this research. You can find me on Twitter or Forecasted. I'll try to answer 3 questions in my talk. 1, what sequencing rules are. 2, what kind of sequencing rules exist. And 3, in my research I try to answer a question if sequencing rules actually affect trading on decentralized exchanges, and I'll try to show them. Since I'll be talking about trading on decentralized exchanges, I'll do a quick refresher so we know the difference between centralized exchanges and decentralized exchanges. Decentralized exchanges bring a lot of different benefits like no intermediaries or greater autonomy and flexibility, but for us the important thing is that when we trade on decentralized exchanges, our trades, before they're included in the blocks, they need to be sequenced, at least on Ethereum and EVM blockchains. And this sequencing rules can be simple, but there are different ways to implement them. And if we try to visualize this problem, so let's say we have different transactions, let's say we have 3 candidate transactions, and we are a builder, and we need to build a block, so we need to decide which transaction goes first, second, and third. So what we can do, we can actually extract some value, and we can insert our own transactions. We can do some MEV. We can, in this case, we can sandwich some uninformed users. We can buy cheaper or sell when the price is higher, and we can do all sorts of different things. And if you think about this problem is just a knapsack problem. So we just need to solve this knapsack problem. This is the formal definition of this problem, and we need to include as many transactions as possible and maximize our profit as a builder. So on one side, we have builders who are trying to maximize profit, and this problem is well understood. But on the other side, if you're trading on decentralized exchanges and if you're trading on blockchains, then we expect some sort of guarantees, and we expect some sort of trading experience, and we expect some level of trade fairness. And this is not guaranteed by the current setup. So there is a lot of research, and we know that it's impossible to find a sequencing rule that would prevent builders from extracting any value, but at least there are verifiable rules that can give some sort of guarantees for trade execution. And also there are different ways to mitigate this, such as private pools or batch options that can be used to improve trading experience. So I try to explain what sequencing rules are, and in my research I also try to categorize all of them. My taxonomy was inspired by this one from Quintus. This is taken from Quintus' post on Flashbots research forum. So what he did, he tried to classify sequencing rules by their runtime complexity. So because we know that block building is a knapsack problem, it can be solved just by very well-known algorithms in computer science. And the main idea here is that if we're solving block building, and we cannot expect block builders to apply algorithms that cannot be solved in NP in implementable time. So that's why he's classifying algorithms according to runtime complexity and also input availability. One thing we can observe is that sequencing algorithms, mechanisms, they can be applied on different levels of blockchain infrastructure stacks. So we can start from consensus itself, we can apply them on a sequencer level, but we can also apply them on application level. And it can be on-chain applications or it can be off-chain applications as well. So I'll start with the consensus level, and there is already a lot of research where different algorithms are trying to impose some sort of fairness. And on consensus level, this fairness is usually described as through using arrival time. So basically, if my transaction arrives first, it should be executed first. If my transaction arrives second, it should be executed second. The problem here is that on decentralized exchanges, we have different nodes, and it's really hard to apply FIFO in a distributed system. So that's why there are different algorithms. The notable ones are Quick and Themis. They're trying to apply trade fairness at consensus level. Now we have a lot of rollups, and sequencers are a very important part of rollups. And if you have sequencers, they're usually centralized most of the time. And with the centralized sequencers, we can apply all sorts of algorithms. We can just apply greedy algorithms, what Flashbots and others are doing. We can actually do FIFO, and we can also do different sorts of dictatorship algorithms. We can just say, I will include all transactions of my friends, or whatever we want. We can also apply sequencing algorithms on application level, but it's hard to do it on Ethereum and other EVM blockchains, because on Ethereum, application logic is tightly coupled with the consensus logic and sequencing logic, so that's why it's really hard to do that. But there are ways to try to incentivize builders to follow application-specific rules through auctions or priority queues. And there are also different designs of new types of AMS that are trying to apply sequencing rules on application level. And if we're talking about off-chain solving, then we can outsource block building to, or we can outsource matching or any other algorithm that we're trying to apply to off-chain solvers, and that's what, for example, CowSwap and other batch options are doing. So it's much easier if we're talking about off-chain applications. Yeah, so these are different levels where application, where sequencing logic can be applied on application level, sequencer level, consensus level, and there are different ways to enforce sequencing. Like I said, we can do FIFO, that's the simplest. We can use auctions, and there are also cryptographic techniques that can be applied to improve trading experience. They're way beyond the scope of this talk. And the question here, if we're talking about fairness, it's fairly simple to talk about fairness using arrival time. So again, if my transaction comes first, it should be executed first. But if you're trading about, if we're talking about trading experience, then it's a little bit harder. And there are a lot of different studies from auctions theory. Some people are trying to measure potential functions of liquidity pools. So there are all sorts of very sophisticated ways to measure trade fairness. But the notable one is periodic slippage. So basically, if we're trading on an exchange, then we want to measure the cost of swap on an exchange, and part of that cost is basically your reordering slippage. If your trade is reordered, then your cost increases, and that's usually that's often used as a way to measure trading experience. And to answer my last question is if sequencing rules actually affect trading on decentralized exchanges, I try to build a simulation, and I'll present a short case study. So this is a simple framework that I built. I basically pulling data from Zoom and Cryo, that I'm forking chain on using Foundry, and that I'm executing transactions. So usually the order slippage is measured theoretically. People are trying to estimate it, but what I try to do, I try to simulate it and actually measure actual trade execution. And there are a lot of formulas, but what I'm trying to do, I'm trying to measure some sort of reorder slippage, and if I'm trading on a decentralized exchange, I'm basically trying to measure if I'm getting more tokens or less with sequencing rules or without. So that's basically what I have here. And when we look at the results, it's really hard to say anything. So this is data from one block. So one block doesn't tell anything. It's hard to tell. But when we run simulation on a lot of blocks, again, most of the time, sequencing rules don't matter. Sometimes people get less from their trade, sometimes they get more. But there is an outlier, at least in this experiment. Somebody got almost 50% more tokens, and if we zoom in, the somebody was actually sandwiched by Jared from Subway. So what this tells us is that most of the time, sequencing rules don't matter. Somebody gets less, somebody gets more, but what sequencing rules can provide, they can improve trading experience by preventing sandwiches. So if I'm trading on the decentralized exchange, at least I would expect some sort of guarantees that I will get that my trade will be executed using the best price. So that's one thing that sequencing algorithms can provide. And, yeah. So somebody marks, if you're interested in these topics, then you should go and check verifiable sequencing rules and Converse operator. So there are a lot of interesting topics. And last, again, if you're interested in this topic, there is a lot of research on parallel execution of transactions in the block. So in the beginning, I was talking about sequencing of transactions in Ethereum, but on parallel blockchains, it's different. So, for example, this visualization is taken from a project developed by Ghostlocks. So what they're doing, they are visualizing dependencies of transactions on each other in different blocks. So we can see there are some blocks where each transaction depends on the other, and basically this block, it's hard to parallelize transactions in this block, but sometimes trades are very independent, and we can distribute them and execute them in parallel. And another hot topic right now is application-specific sequencing, ASS. In the taxonomy, I was saying that it's really hard to enforce application-specific application-level sequencing on Ethereum because application-level logic is highly coupled with consensus-level logic. But this research, for example, is exploring application-specific sequencing beyond Ethereum. It's easier to apply application-specific rules on Cosmos and Astria blockchain, and there is a lot of interesting research. This was taken from Lily's talk from Astria, and there are new blockchains that are developed with this concept in mind. And if you're interested, then you can check this and a lot of more cool research on application-specific sequencing. Yeah. That's it. Thank you. If you have any questions, I can answer them.
Are there any questions from the audience?
For very long, what is fair and how people perceive fairness. And I think simple rules which we are applying on daily life as first in, first out, people is really a cool idea because we don't use it in our daily life and exactly. So, do you think that why do we need more than just a simple rule? Why do we need then other dictatorship? Or if you go back to the last slide, you kind of with an overview who decides the ordering. I mean, with more people involved, I think it's about manipulation, market manipulation. From a finance perspective, then I would prefer a super simple rule which no one can break. And what's your opinion about that, or what is
So I think there are two questions.
Yes.
One is you were saying why don't we just apply FIFO all the time?
Correct.
And second about centralization.
Yes.
If it should be always, are you asking if it should be always centralized?
Yes.
So first question, FIFO. Yeah, I think yes. Basically, most of the time FIFO is the only thing we need for trade execution, and that's what happens in centralized exchanges. But that basically incentivizes collocation and people. But that's the most fair thing to do if your transaction comes first and it's executed. But the thing is that it's harder to apply FIFO in a decentralized system. So that's why people are trying to do different things. It's easier if you have a centralized sequencer. Second, about decentralization, it's hard for me to answer the question. It's like it's really a choice. But I think here important concept is censorship resistance. So the whole point is that if I'm trading on decentralized exchanges, then I probably have reasons for that. And if there is just one centralized sequencer, then it's really hard to guarantee censorship resistance. And yeah, at least the way I see it, that's one of the reasons I would go to a more decentralized system. I'm not sure if I was able to answer the question.
So in an asynchronous system where everyone has different blocks, how do you define cycle?
In an asynchronous, yes. So that's what a lot of research. There are a lot of algorithms that are trying to apply FIFO on consensus level, and so you cannot do FIFO directly. So that's why you tighten the definition of arrival time. So it's hard to enforce transaction level FIFO ordering, but you can tighten it and say if your transaction arrived during building of this block, at least it will be included in this block and not in the next. So it will be block level, some sort of block level arrival. Yes.
Then the FIFO history used by Solana solve that problem?
That's a completely different consensus algorithm. So it's hard to say if it solves the problem or not. You mean the problem of trade fairness? I think one takeaway from the case study is that most of the time sequencing rules don't matter, but they matter when users are sandwiched or if there are some predatory MEV techniques. And on Solana, when the mempool by Jita was introduced, there were also sandwiches executed in Solana. So I think that's a counterexample that these things can also happen on Solana. Consensus algorithm itself doesn't solve it, at least the way I see it. But if we don't have mempool, then it's hard to answer this question. It is really hard to see what validators in Solana are doing, and yeah, I think it's also hard to compare these two systems, these two different consensus algorithms.
This is a very tricky question, I guess. But what's your impression of how much of the unfairness could be solved by just encryption or
Yeah, that's a very good question. So a lot of problems come because transactions are public and mempool, and most of the time, if you go through a private relay, then you can mitigate MEV. But I think there is research that cryptographic rules they mitigate MEV, but they create other problems that blocks are built like the timing of block building. I think it's basically it's really hard to prevent MEV. That's one takeaway from all this research and from traditional finance. It mitigates, but people will invent new techniques and strategies. But at least it's a very good technique.
Yeah, in Zcash, for example, when transactions depend on each other, they have to be in different blocks in the agreement system. So that's obviously a limitation on latency.
Yeah, but it's definitely a very good technique, and there is a lot of research on how it mitigates the issue.
I have a question to the slides where we're showing the different techniques being applied when it comes to the simulation approaches. Did you consider for this data mainly on-chain information, or did you actually also look, for example, into some off-chain information? For example, failed transmission, they shouldn't necessarily make it on-chain, but actually could lead to different findings. So the question is basically, we're only using historical on-chain data. Is it a transaction you try to replay, or would you also consider, for example, some off-chain information like failed transaction that maybe aren't available?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So I only used on-chain data.
Okay.
So when I was simulating transactions, I only used transactions already included in the block, and I was evaluating them. But this, as you're saying, this is not a complete view, because there are also other transactions in public mempool, other transactions in private mempools. There are also bundles, and it's a really sophisticated problem. And there are a lot of different moving parts. I didn't consider it in the simulation.
Just out of curiosity, if I do analytics is, for example, storing some of these aspects of blockchain and then being available to users, or not?
So on TUM, we have data sets provided by other data providers, and we have Beaver Build and Flashbots. They're hosting their data sets, their mempool data sets. So I think the ones that I know, Flashbots mempool. I actually use Flashbots mempool to identify the arrival time of transactions for the simulation. But there are also other data sets that can be used, and there are also data sets like bundles, data sets that are also interesting. But that's a whole different problem.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. So in case there are no further questions, thank you again, yes.